The divorce papers hit the table with a soft thud that somehow echoed louder than the music still playing from my phone. I stared at the official documents, my name typed in cold black letters next to words like irreconcilable differences and dissolution of marriage. Just 3 weeks ago, I had been dancing in Caleb's arms at our anniversary dinner, feeling alive for the first time in years. Now I was sitting alone in our apartment, surrounded by legal documents that spelled out the end of everything I thought I knew. How did it come to this? How did a single dance at what was supposed to be a celebration turn into my husband methodically dismantling our 8-year marriage with the precision of an accountant balancing books? My name is Tilly Gray, and I used to think I was the victim in this story. The anniversary dinner had been my idea. After months of feeling invisible in my own marriage, I wanted something special. Caleb had been working late every night, buried in spreadsheets and tax documents. When he came home, he barely looked up from his laptop. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, going through the motions of being a wife and mother without any of the joy or connection I craved. "We need to celebrate," I had told him 3 weeks earlier, cornering him in the kitchen while he mechanically ate cereal for dinner. 8 years, Caleb. That's something worth acknowledging. He had looked up from his bowl with those tired brown eyes that used to make my heart skip. "Sure, Tilly. Whatever you want to plan." Whatever I wanted to plan. Not, "Let's plan something together," or, "What would make you happy?" Just the weary resignation of a man checking off another item on an endless to-do list. That's when I decided to invite Rafa. Rafael Moreno had been my friend since college, back when I was Otilia Vega and the world felt full of possibilities. He worked as an event promoter now, always surrounded by energy and laughter, and people who hung on his every word. When Rafa walked into a room, conversations got louder, drinks got stronger, and everyone seemed to remember what fun felt like. "Bring the whole family," I had texted him. "Lydia and Nate are coming, plus Caleb's mom. It'll be like old times." "Can't wait to see you shine, Tilly," he had responded with a string of dancing emojis. The restaurant I chose was perfect. Dim lighting, live jazz trio, and a small dance floor that beckoned couples to move together like they meant something to each other. I wore the red dress that used to make Caleb's eyes linger, the one that hugged my curves and made me feel like the woman I used to be instead of the tired, administrative assistant I had become. Caleb arrived exactly on time, wearing his standard navy blazer and the expression of someone attending a work function. He kissed my cheek with the same enthusiasm he might show a distant relative. "You look nice," he said, the words as flat as week-old soda. My sister Lydia arrived with her husband Nate, and immediately started fussing over the table arrangements. At 36, she had perfected the art of managing everyone's expectations, while somehow making it look effortless. Her teaching background showed in the way she smoothly redirected conversations and anticipated needs before anyone voiced them. "This place is gorgeous, Tilly," she said, squeezing my hand. "You outdid yourself." Caleb's mother Helen arrived with her usual understated elegance, bringing flowers and compliments about the restaurant choice. At 58, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades as a nurse, managing crises with steady hands and calm words. 8 years, she said, hugging both Caleb and me. "It feels like yesterday when you two were planning the wedding." The kids, Emma, 7, and Lucas, 4, were staying with a babysitter, giving us adults the chance to actually have conversations that lasted longer than 30 seconds. I had been looking forward to this all week, imagining meaningful talks and laughter, and the kind of connection I felt starved for. Then Rafa walked in. He moved like music, all easy confidence and genuine smiles. His dark hair was perfectly tousled, his shirt just fitted enough to hint at the gym membership he actually used. When he hugged me, I caught a whiff of his cologne, something expensive and warm that made me remember what it felt like to be desired. "There's my beautiful friend," he said, spinning me around once before setting me down. "Marriage looks good on you, Tilly." The lie felt kind, and I basked in it. Dinner conversation flowed easily with Rafa there. He had stories about the events he promoted, funny encounters with demanding clients, and a way of making everyone feel included in the joke. Even Helen was laughing at his impression of a bridezilla who insisted on having live swans at her reception. "They kept trying to escape," Rafa said, gesturing wildly with his wine glass. "By the end of the night, we had hotel staff chasing swans through the lobby, while the bride cried about her vision being ruined." Nate nearly choked on his drink. "Please tell me you have video of this." "I'm not allowed to share it, but let's just say it's been very useful for negotiating better contracts." I found myself laughing harder than I had in months, feeling lighter and more alive with each story. Across the table, Caleb was smiling politely, but checking his phone periodically, probably thinking about work even during our anniversary dinner. When the jazz trio started playing The Way You Look Tonight, Rafa stood and extended his hand to me. "Come on, Tilly, let's show these people how it's done." I glanced at Caleb, expecting him to object, or at least look mildly interested in dancing with his own wife. Instead, he was scrolling through emails, completely absorbed in whatever crisis couldn't wait until Monday. "Go ahead," he said without looking up. "You love to dance." The dismissal in his voice stung more than if he had said no outright. Here was my husband, on our anniversary, giving me permission to dance with another man because he couldn't be bothered to do it himself. So I took Rafa's hand. The dance floor was small and intimate, just big enough for two couples to move without bumping into each other. Rafa's hand settled on my waist with just the right amount of pressure, confident but respectful, the touch of someone who knew how to lead without being controlling. "You're tense," he murmured as we swayed to the music. "Relax, this is supposed to be fun." I let myself melt into the rhythm, following his lead as he spun me gently and pulled me back into his arms. For the first time in months, I felt graceful, beautiful, worth someone's complete attention. "There she is," Rafa said, his voice warm with approval. "There's the Tilly I remember." The song seemed to last forever and end too soon. When the final notes faded, I found myself still in Rafa's arms, breathless and glowing with the kind of happiness I had almost forgotten existed. That's when I looked back at our table and saw Caleb watching us. He wasn't angry. He wasn't jealous. He was completely, utterly calm, wearing the same expression he got when reviewing financial statements, analytical, detached, filing away information for future reference. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and he smiled. Not the warm smile I had fallen in love with 8 years ago, but something cooler and more controlled. Then he stood up, placed his napkin on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without saying a word to anyone. "Where's he going?" Lydia asked, looking between the empty chair and my flushed face. "Probably to take a work call," I said quickly, though my heart was suddenly racing. "You know how he is about deadlines." But I knew it wasn't about work. Something in that smile had felt final, like a door closing that I hadn't even realized was open. Rafa squeezed my hand as we returned to the table. "Don't worry about it, Tilly. Some people just don't know how to have fun." I wanted to believe that was all it was, Caleb being his usual serious, work-obsessed self. But as the evening continued and he didn't return, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The way he had looked at me while I danced with Rafa wasn't the look of a hurt husband. It was the look of someone making a decision. When I finally got home that night, I found Caleb in the living room, laptop open, typing with the methodical focus he brought to everything. He looked up when I entered, his expression neutral and unreadable. "Did you have a good time?" he asked, his tone perfectly polite. "It was nice," I said carefully. "I'm sorry you had to leave early. Was everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Tilly. I just needed to take care of some things." He went back to typing, and I stood there in my red dress, feeling suddenly foolish and overdressed for whatever this moment was. The woman who had felt so alive on the dance floor seemed like a stranger now, someone I had pretended to be for a few stolen minutes. "Caleb, we should talk." "It's late," he said without looking up. "We can talk tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and the conversation never happened. Instead, something else began, a quiet, methodical process that I wouldn't understand until it was far too late to stop. The next morning, I woke up to find Caleb already gone. His side of the bed was made with military precision, and there was a note on the kitchen counter next to a fresh pot of coffee. "Taking kids to Mom's for the day. Back this evening. C." The formality of the note struck me as odd. When had Caleb started signing notes to his own wife? When had "love you," or even just his initial, become a full, distant signature? I poured myself coffee and scrolled through my phone, finding the videos that Lydia had taken at dinner. There I was, laughing at Rafa's stories, my face animated in a way I barely recognized. And there was the dance, 30 seconds of pure joy as Rafa spun me around the small dance floor. Without really thinking about it, I posted the video to my Instagram with the caption, "Sometimes you have to remind yourself what happiness feels like." Anniversary, all dancing, living my best life. The likes and comments started immediately. Friends from work, old college acquaintances, even some people I barely knew were heart-eyeing and fire emojiing their approval. "You look amazing." "So fun." "Where has this Tilly been hiding?" Where had this Tilly been hiding? Buried under 8 years of routine and responsibility, apparently. Lost somewhere between packing school lunches and managing household schedules, and trying to have conversations with a husband who seemed more interested in tax codes than in the woman he married. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "Saw the video. You look radiant, beautiful. Hope the hubby appreciated what he's got." The message made me smile in a way that felt both wonderful and dangerous. When was the last time Caleb had called me beautiful? When was the last time he had looked at me like Rafa had last night? Like I was worth his complete attention? I was still basking in the social media validation when Caleb returned that evening with Emma and Lucas. The kids ran to me with their usual enthusiasm, chattering about their day with Grandma Helen. But Caleb remained distant, methodically unpacking their overnight bags and organizing their belongings. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to inject some warmth into the conversation. "Fine. Mom says hello." That was it. No questions about my day, no mention of the night before, no acknowledgement of the anniversary dinner that had ended so abruptly. It was like the whole evening had been filed away in some mental cabinet marked "completed" and forgotten. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes that felt significant. Caleb moved some of his clothes to the guest room closet, claiming he didn't want to wake me when he got up early for work. He started keeping a separate calendar on his phone instead of using our shared family one. When I asked about it, he said it was easier for managing his client meetings. The explanations were all perfectly reasonable, but they added up to something that felt like distance. Like he was quietly, methodically separating his life from mine, without any dramatic declarations or arguments. I found myself checking my phone more often, refreshing the likes on my dance video, and rereading the comments that reminded me I was still someone worth noticing. Rafa had started texting more frequently, nothing inappropriate, just friendly check-ins and funny memes that made me laugh. "How's married life treating you?" he texted one afternoon while I was at work. "Same as always," I replied, then deleted it and wrote instead, "Some days are better than others." You deserve better than some days, Tilly. You deserve to feel special every day. The message sat on my screen like a small rebellion against the mundane reality of my marriage. I screenshotted it before I could talk myself out of it, saving it in a folder I labeled "Good Days," along with other messages and memes that made me smile. That weekend, Lydia called to check in about the anniversary dinner. "Everything okay with you and Caleb?" she asked in that careful way that meant she had already formed her own opinion. He seemed upset when he left the restaurant. He's fine, I said automatically. Just work stress. You know how he gets during tax season. It wasn't technically tax season, but it was a convenient excuse that Lydia would accept. The truth was, I didn't really know how Caleb was, or what he was thinking. We had been living in the same house for a week, sharing meals and parenting duties, and the basic logistics of married life. But we hadn't had a real conversation since the anniversary dinner. Maybe you two should plan a weekend away, Lydia suggested. Just the two of you. I could watch the kids. Maybe, I said, though the idea felt more exhausting than appealing. A weekend away with Caleb meant 2 days of polite conversation and careful silences, 2 days of trying to reconnect with someone who seemed determined to maintain emotional distance. When I mentioned Lydia's suggestion to Caleb that evening, he looked up from his laptop with the same neutral expression that had become his default. "If you want to plan something, go ahead," he said. "Just let me know the dates so I can clear my schedule." The lack of enthusiasm in his voice made the offer feel more like a chore than a romantic gesture. I found myself wondering what would happen if I suggested going away with Rafa instead. Would Caleb even care, or would he just ask me to coordinate childcare arrangements? The thought was dangerous, and I pushed it away, but it lingered in the back of my mind like a song I couldn't quite forget. That night, I found Caleb in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, with his laptop balanced on his knees. He had moved more of his things in there: his alarm clock, his reading glasses, the small stack of books he kept on his nightstand. "Are you moving out of our bedroom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just temporarily," he said without looking up. "I've been waking up early for client calls. This way I won't disturb you." "I don't mind being disturbed." He finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Hurt maybe, or disappointment. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I think this arrangement works better for both of us," he said quietly. I wanted to argue, to demand that we talk about what was really happening between us. But standing there in the doorway of what used to be our guest room, watching my husband treat our marriage like a business arrangement that needed better logistics, I felt suddenly exhausted by the prospect of fighting for something he seemed determined to let go. "Fine," I said. "Whatever works." As I walked back to our bedroom, my bedroom now, apparently, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the comments on my dance video again. Dozens of people telling me I looked happy, that I was glowing, that I deserved to feel that way all the time. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did deserve more than careful politeness and separate calendars, and a husband who treated our anniversary like an obligation to be endured. I opened my messages and typed a quick text to Rafa. "What are you doing this weekend?" His response came back almost immediately. "Whatever you want to do, beautiful. What did you have in mind?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Surprise me." It felt like stepping off a cliff, but after a week of living with a husband who seemed to have already emotionally moved out, the prospect of falling didn't seem as scary as staying in place. The rooftop bar was exactly the kind of place Rafa excelled in: trendy, loud, and full of people who dressed like they had somewhere important to be. I felt underdressed in my jeans and blouse until Rafa appeared at my elbow with a cosmopolitan and a grin that made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. "You made it," he said, leaning in close so I could hear him over the music. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." I wasn't sure either, honestly. I had changed clothes 3 times and nearly turned around twice on the drive over. But here I was, sipping an overpriced cocktail and pretending I was the kind of woman who went to rooftop bars on Saturday nights instead of folding laundry and watching Netflix. "Where's the husband tonight?" Rafa asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Home with the kids," I said, which was technically true. Caleb was home, and the kids were there, but it wasn't like we had discussed it or planned it together. I had simply announced I was going out with friends, and he had nodded without asking for details. His loss, Rafa said, raising his glass to mine, to beautiful women who know how to have fun. The compliment went straight to my head, mixing with the alcohol and the music, and the general atmosphere of people being young and careless. For the next 2 hours, I let myself be that person, the woman who laughed too loudly at Rafa's jokes, who danced when he pulled her onto the small dance floor, who didn't check her phone every 10 minutes to see if her husband had noticed she was gone. "You're different tonight," Rafa said during a quieter moment between songs, more like the Tilly I used to know. "Maybe this is who I really am," I said, the words coming out more honest than I intended. "Maybe the other version is just who I became. Then maybe it's time to become yourself again." Someone was taking pictures of the crowd, one of those roving photographers who capture candid moments for the bar's social media. When the flash went off, I was laughing at something Rafa had whispered in my ear, his hand resting lightly on my waist as we swayed to the music. "That's going to be a good one," he said, winking at the photographer. I should have been worried about the picture ending up online. I should have thought about who might see it, what it might look like to anyone who knew I was married. Instead, I felt a thrill at the idea of being captured in a moment of pure happiness, even if that happiness was complicated. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The house was dark except for the porch light Caleb always left on for me. I kicked off my heels in the entryway and tried to walk quietly up the stairs, but the third step creaked like it always did. "Did you have a good time?" Caleb's voice came from the living room, calm and conversational. I found him sitting in his chair with a book in his lap, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He didn't look angry or worried, just alert, like he had been waiting up not out of concern, but out of curiosity. "Yeah, it was fun," I said, suddenly feeling defensive. "Just drinks with friends." "Good, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself." The conversation felt like a script we were both reading from, polite and meaningless. I wanted him to ask where I had been, who I was with, why I looked flushed and happy in a way I never did after our own date nights. I wanted some sign that my absence had mattered to him. Instead, he marked his place in his book and stood up. "I'm going to bed. Good night, Tilly." "Good night," I said to his retreating figure. Sunday morning brought the consequences of my Saturday night rebellion. The rooftop bar had indeed posted the pictures from the previous evening, and I was tagged in 3 of them. In 2, I was dancing with Rafa, looking carefree and radiant. In the 3rd, we were sitting close together at the bar, his hand on my knee as we shared some private joke. I should have untagged myself immediately. Instead, I found myself studying the photos, marveling at how happy I looked. When was the last time someone had captured me looking like that? When was the last time I had felt like that? My phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends from work were commenting on the photos, asking who the handsome man was and where I had been hiding this fun version of myself. A few college friends I hadn't spoken to in years were liking and commenting, reminiscing about old parties and good times. Then I saw a comment from my coworker Janet. "Doesn't look like anniversary season was too hard on you." My stomach dropped. Janet had been at my anniversary dinner. She knew exactly when these photos were taken and what they might imply. If Janet was commenting, that meant other people from work were seeing the pictures too. People who knew I was married, who knew Caleb, who would draw their own conclusions about what it meant for a married woman to be photographed, looking so intimate with a man who wasn't her husband. I quickly untagged myself from the photos, but the damage was already done. Screenshots lived forever, and gossip traveled faster than any attempt at damage control. Monday morning at work confirmed my worst fears. I could feel eyes on me as I walked to my desk, hear conversations that stopped abruptly when I passed. Janet appeared at my cubicle within an hour of my arrival, coffee in hand and curiosity written all over her face. "So," she said, settling into the chair beside my desk, "want to tell me about your weekend?" "Just went out with friends," I said, not looking up from my computer screen. Nothing exciting. The photos looked pretty exciting. That guy you were with is gorgeous. How does Caleb feel about your new friend? The question was designed to sound casual, but I could hear the judgment underneath it. Janet was fishing for gossip, looking for confirmation of whatever story she had already constructed in her head. Rafa's an old friend from college, I said firmly. There's nothing inappropriate about having friends. Of course not, Janet agreed, though her tone suggested otherwise. I'm sure Caleb understands that. He's always seemed very trusting. She said trusting like it was a character flaw, like Caleb was naive for not keeping me on a shorter leash. The implication made me angry, though I wasn't entirely sure if I was angry at Janet for suggesting it, or at Caleb for giving her reason to think it. The day only got worse from there. I caught 2 other co-workers whispering and looking in my direction during lunch. Someone had apparently shared the photos in the office group chat because people who weren't even connected to me on social media were giving me knowing looks and smirks. By the time I got home, I was furious. At my co-workers for being gossips, at myself for not being more careful, and at Caleb for not caring enough to even ask about the photos that were apparently circulating around my workplace. But when I walked into the house, ready to vent my frustration, I found Caleb in the kitchen with his laptop open and a stack of papers spread across the counter. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. "How was work?" he asked, the same question he asked every day. "Fine," I said automatically, then stopped. Actually, no, it wasn't fine. People are gossiping about those photos from Saturday night, making it into something it's not. "What photos?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures from the rooftop bar, watching his face for some reaction. Anger, hurt, jealousy, anything that would indicate he cared about what he was seeing. Instead, he studied the photos with the same analytical expression he brought to financial documents. "You look happy," he said finally. "That's it. That's all you have to say." "What would you like me to say, Tilly?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. What did I want him to say? That he was jealous? That he was hurt? That seeing me look so happy with another man made him realize what he was losing? "I want you to care," I said, the words coming out more vulnerable than I intended. "I do care," he said quietly. "I care that you're happy. I care that you feel free to spend time with friends. I care that you don't feel trapped or constrained by our marriage." The words should have been reassuring, but something in his tone made them sound like a goodbye. Like he was giving me permission to leave, clearing the way for me to make choices he had already accepted. "Caleb, what's happening to us?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the papers spread across the counter. When he looked back up, his expression was sad but resolved. "I think we both know the answer to that, Tilly. The question is what we're going to do about it." Before I could ask what he meant, Emma ran into the kitchen asking for help with her homework, and the moment dissolved into the familiar chaos of family life. But as I helped my daughter with her math problems, I couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb and I had just had a conversation about the end of something, even if neither of us had been brave enough to say it out loud. That night, I lay in our empty bedroom, my bedroom now, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "Hope you survived the Monday blues. You deserve better than people who don't appreciate what they have." I typed and deleted a dozen responses before finally settling on, "Thank you, that means a lot." It wasn't until after I sent it that I realized I hadn't told Rafa about the gossip at work or the awkward conversation with Caleb. Somehow he had known exactly what I needed to hear, exactly when I needed to hear it. Maybe that should have been a red flag. Instead, it felt like a lifeline. The spreadsheet appeared on the kitchen counter Tuesday morning, like a declaration of war disguised as household organization. Neat columns labeled asset, value, primary user, and documentation filled 2 pages of meticulously formatted data. Our house, our cars, our bank accounts, even the kids' college funds, everything quantified and categorized with the precision Caleb brought to his clients' financial planning. I found him in the guest room, his room now, apparently, getting dressed for work with the methodical efficiency of someone who had already mentally moved out. "What is this?" I asked, waving the papers. "Household inventory," he said, adjusting his tie without looking at me. I realized we don't have good documentation of our assets. Seemed like something we should address. "Why now? Are you planning something?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us seemed ready to address directly. Caleb finished with his tie and turned to face me, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm planning to be prepared, Tilly, for whatever comes next." The phrase, "whatever comes next," sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't about organization or preparation. This was about exit strategies and legal documentation. This was about a man who had made up his mind and was now methodically executing a plan. "Caleb, if you want to talk about our marriage..." "Do you want to talk about our marriage?" he asked, his voice perfectly level. "Because I've been waiting for that conversation for quite a while now." I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. What was I supposed to say? That I was sorry for dancing with Rafa? That I was sorry for going out and having fun? That I was sorry for wanting to feel attractive and appreciated and alive? "I didn't think so," Caleb said when my silence stretched too long. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." He picked up his briefcase and walked past me toward the door, leaving me standing in his room with a spreadsheet that felt like a roadmap to the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. The rest of the week followed a pattern that felt both familiar and completely foreign. Caleb was present but absent, helpful but distant. He made breakfast for the kids, drove them to school, attended Emma's soccer practice, and helped Lucas with his reading. All the motions of being a husband and father without any of the emotional connection that used to make those activities feel like shared experiences. Meanwhile, I found myself gravitating toward my phone more and more, scrolling through social media and checking messages from Rafa with the frequency of an addiction. He had started sending me articles about women rediscovering themselves after years of putting everyone else first, memes about the importance of self-care, and little observations about life that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. "You're glowing these days," he texted Wednesday afternoon. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up." I wasn't doing anything differently except feeling increasingly disconnected from my own life, but the compliment still made me smile. When was the last time Caleb had noticed that I was glowing? When was the last time he had noticed anything about me that wasn't related to household logistics or child-rearing responsibilities? Thursday evening, I came home from work to find Caleb on the phone in the living room, speaking in the low, professional tone he used with clients. But as I got closer, I caught fragments of conversation that didn't sound like tax planning. Or documentation should be sufficient for initial filing. Custody arrangement that prioritizes the children's stability. Prefer to keep this as amicable as possible. My blood turned to ice. Custody arrangement, initial filing. Those weren't phrases you used when discussing someone's quarterly taxes. I stood frozen in the hallway, shopping bags still in my hands, as my husband calmly discussed the logistics of dismantling our family with what could only be a lawyer. When he noticed me standing there, he didn't look guilty or caught, just mildly inconvenienced by the interruption. "I'll call you back tomorrow," he said into the phone, then hung up and looked at me with the same neutral expression he had been wearing for weeks. "Was that a lawyer?" I asked, though we both knew the answer. "Yes." "Are you divorcing me?" "I'm exploring my options, Tilly. I think you should probably do the same." The calm reasonableness in his voice was somehow more devastating than if he had been angry or emotional. This wasn't a decision made in the heat of passion or hurt feelings. This was a calculated choice made by someone who had weighed the evidence and found our marriage wanting. "Don't I get a say in this?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Of course you do. You've been having your say for weeks now. What's that supposed to mean? It means that actions are a form of communication, Tilly, and you've been very clear about what you want. I wanted to argue with him, to deny whatever conclusions he had drawn from my friendship with Rafa and my nights out, and my general desire to feel like something more than a household manager. But standing there in our living room, looking at my husband's calm, resolved face, I realized I didn't actually know what I wanted. Did I want to save our marriage? Did I want to fight for something that had felt dead for months before I ever danced with Rafa? Or did I want the freedom to explore whatever this new version of myself might become without the weight of Caleb's quiet disappointment holding me back? I need some air, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. Take your time, Caleb replied, already turning back to his papers. I'll handle dinner and bedtime. I drove aimlessly for an hour, eventually finding myself parked outside a coffee shop near Rafa's apartment. Without really thinking about it, I texted him. Are you free? I could use a friendly face. He appeared within 10 minutes, sliding into the passenger seat with the easy confidence that had always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, studying my face with concern. I think I'm becoming one, I said, and then the whole story came pouring out. The spreadsheet, the lawyer call, Caleb's calm certainty that our marriage was over. Rafa listened without interrupting, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand or brush a tear from my cheek. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Maybe this is a good thing, he said finally. How is my husband planning to divorce me a good thing? Because maybe it means you can finally stop pretending to be someone you're not. Maybe it means you can figure out who you really are when you're not trying to be the perfect wife to someone who doesn't appreciate you. The words hit something deep inside me, a truth I hadn't been ready to acknowledge. How long had I been performing the role of Caleb's wife instead of living as myself? How many years had I spent trying to be enough for someone who seemed determined to find me lacking? You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are, Rafa continued, his voice soft and sincere. Someone who makes you feel alive instead of making you feel invisible. When he leaned over to kiss me, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It was soft and warm and full of all the appreciation and desire I had been starving for. For 30 seconds, I let myself melt into it, let myself feel wanted and chosen and alive. Then reality crashed back in, and I pulled away. I can't, I said, though my body was still humming from his touch. You can, he said gently. You just have to decide what you want more, to keep pretending everything is fine, or to start being honest about what makes you happy. I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling from Rafa's kiss, and my mind racing with possibilities I wasn't ready to examine. When I walked into the house, I found Caleb reading bedtime stories to the kids, his voice warm and animated in a way it never was when he spoke to me anymore. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Hope, maybe, or curiosity about where I had been and why I looked so shaken. Everything okay? He asked. I almost told him then. Almost confessed about Rafa and the kiss, and the growing certainty that I was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. Almost asked him if there was any way back from the careful distance we had built between us. Instead, I nodded and said, just needed to clear my head. Good, he said, turning back to the book. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. But as I listened to him finish reading to our children, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both just buying time before an inevitable reckoning. The only question was, who would be brave enough to stop pretending first? The process server arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was having coffee with Lydia. We were sitting at her kitchen table, the kids playing in the backyard, having one of those sister conversations that felt both necessary and dangerous. She had been asking careful questions about Caleb and me for weeks, and I'd been giving careful non-answers that fooled neither of us. Tilly, I'm worried about you, she said, refilling my coffee cup with the kind of maternal efficiency that made her such a good teacher. You seem different lately, restless. Maybe different is good, I said, scrolling through my phone to avoid her searching gaze. Maybe I've been the same for too long. Different isn't always better. Sometimes different is just different. Before I could respond to that piece of sisterly wisdom, the doorbell rang. Lydia frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and it was barely 9 in the morning. When she opened the door, I heard a man's voice asking for Ottilia Gray. My stomach dropped. Nobody called me Ottilia except for official documents and people who had never met me. I walked to the front door on unsteady legs, finding a middle-aged man in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope and a clipboard. Ottilia Gray? Yes. You've been served. He handed me the envelope with the practiced efficiency of someone who delivered bad news for a living, had me sign his clipboard, and walked away without ceremony. I stood there holding the envelope like it might explode, vaguely aware that Lydia was asking questions I couldn't quite process. Tilly, what is it? What's in the envelope? I opened it with trembling fingers, though I already knew what I would find. The papers were neatly organized, professionally prepared, and devastatingly thorough. Petition for dissolution of marriage was printed across the top in official, unforgiving font. But it wasn't just divorce papers. Caleb had included a folder of evidence that made my blood run cold. Screenshots of my social media posts from the past month. Photos from the rooftop bar with Rafa. Text messages between us that I didn't remember being so flirtatious until I saw them compiled together on paper. And at the bottom of the stack, a series of photos that made my knees go weak. Rafa and me in his car outside the coffee shop, our faces close together in conversation. Rafa's hand on my cheek. The kiss that had lasted 30 seconds, but was captured from multiple angles, clearly showing both of our faces. "Oh, Tilly," Lydia said softly, reading over my shoulder. "What have you done?" I couldn't answer her because I was still processing what I was seeing. The photos were professionally taken, high-quality images that could only have been captured by someone with expensive equipment and a clear line of sight to Rafa's car. Someone who had been watching us, someone who had been waiting. "He hired a private investigator," I whispered, the reality of it hitting me like a physical blow. "He's been having me followed." While I was feeling guilty about dancing with Rafa and exchanging flirty texts and that one stolen kiss, Caleb had been methodically building a case against me. While I was wondering if I was being unfaithful, he was collecting evidence to prove that I was. The custody proposal was the cruelest cut of all. Caleb was asking for primary custody of Emma and Lucas, with me getting alternating weekends and one evening per week. The supporting documentation painted a picture of a mother who was more interested in nightlife and male attention than in her children's stability. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice shaking with anger and shock. "I'm a good mother. I love my kids." "I know you do," Lydia said, but her voice was careful, measured. "But Tilly, these photos, this evidence, it doesn't look good." "It's not what it looks like." "Isn't it?" The question hung between us like an accusation. Was it what it looked like? Was I a married woman who had been pursuing another man, justifying it as friendship while crossing lines I knew were inappropriate? Was I someone who had been so focused on feeling desired and appreciated that I had lost sight of what I was risking? "I need to call him," I said, pulling out my phone with shaking hands. "Tilly, maybe you should call a lawyer instead." But I was already dialing Caleb's number, my heart pounding as it rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His voice sounded calm and professional. "You've reached Caleb Gray. Please leave a message and I'll return your call as soon as possible." "Caleb, it's me. We need to talk. This is insane. Call me back." I tried 3 more times over the next hour, each call going straight to voicemail. Finally, I texted him. "I got the papers. This is crazy. We can work this out." His response came back immediately. My lawyer will contact yours to schedule mediation. Please don't contact me directly about this matter. The formal, legal language was like a slap in the face. This was my husband of 8 years, the father of my children, and he was communicating with me like I was a hostile business contact. He won't talk to me, I told Lydia, who was making nervous busywork in her kitchen while I fell apart at her table. Maybe that's for the best right now. Maybe you both need some space to think clearly. Whose side are you on? I'm on your side, Tilly. I'm always on your side. But I'm also worried that you've gotten yourself into something you don't know how to get out of. The truth of that statement was devastating. I had thought I was just having some harmless fun, reclaiming some piece of myself that had gotten lost in the routine of marriage and motherhood. I hadn't realized I was building a case for my husband to use against me. I hadn't understood that every photo, every text, every moment of feeling alive and appreciated was being documented and catalogued as evidence of my unfitness as a wife and mother. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. Heard about the papers. I'm sorry, Tilly, this is my fault. How did you hear about the papers? I texted back. Word travels fast. Are you okay? The question made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. Was I okay? I was sitting in my sister's kitchen, holding divorce papers that painted me as an adulteress and an unfit mother, while my husband refused to take my calls, and my children had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down. No, I texted back, I'm not okay. Let me help. Let me take you away from all this. The offer was tempting in a way that scared me. It would be so easy to let Rafa rescue me from the mess I had made, to run away with someone who made me feel beautiful and desired and free from the consequences of my choices. But sitting there with the divorce papers spread across Lydia's kitchen table, I finally understood what Caleb had been trying to tell me with his calm questions and careful distance. This wasn't about one dance or one kiss or even one emotional affair. This was about two people who had stopped seeing each other clearly, who had let resentment and neglect build until there was nothing left but the legal framework of a relationship that had died somewhere along the way. I need to fix this myself, I texted Rafa. You can't fix something that was already broken, beautiful. Sometimes you have to let go and start over. Maybe he was right. Maybe Caleb and I had been broken for longer than I wanted to admit. Maybe the dancing and the flirting and the kiss were just symptoms of a marriage that had been dying a slow death for months or even years. But as I looked at the custody arrangement that would turn me into a weekend visitor in my children's lives, I realized that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight came too late to save everything I thought I wanted. I need to go home, I told Lydia. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe you should stay here tonight, give everyone some time to cool down. I need to see my kids. The drive home felt like traveling through a dream where everything looked familiar, but nothing felt real. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw that Caleb's car was gone, but there were lights on in the house. Mrs. Gray's car was parked where Caleb's usually sat. I found my mother-in-law in the kitchen, making dinner with the quiet efficiency that had always intimidated me. She looked up when I entered, her expression neutral but not unkind. Hello, Tilly. Helen, where are Caleb and the kids? The children are upstairs doing homework. Caleb is handling some business. Did he tell you about the divorce papers? She was quiet for a moment, continuing to stir whatever was simmering on the stove. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful and measured. Caleb told me that you and he are having some difficulties. He asked me to stay with the children while you two work things out. And you're okay with that? You're okay with him taking my children away from me? I'm okay with my son protecting his family in whatever way he thinks is best. The words hit me like a physical blow. In Helen's mind, I was no longer part of the family that needed protecting. I was the threat that her son was defending against. I'm their mother, I said, my voice breaking. Yes, you are. And I hope you'll remember what that means when you're making decisions about what comes next. Before I could respond, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her 7-year-old face serious and confused. "Mommy, why is Grandma Helen making dinner? And why does Daddy look sad all the time?" I knelt down to her level, trying to find words that would explain the unexplainable without destroying her sense of security. "Mommy and Daddy are having some grown-up problems that we need to work out," I said, smoothing her hair back from her face. "But we both love you and Lucas very much, and that will never change." "Are you getting divorced like Tommy's parents?" The question came from Lucas, who had appeared behind his sister with the uncanny ability children have to materialize during important conversations. At 4, he didn't fully understand what divorce meant, but he knew it was something that happened to families, something that changed everything. "We're figuring things out," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. "I don't want you to figure things out," Emma said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I want everything to stay the same." As I held my children and tried to comfort them about changes I couldn't explain or control, I finally understood the full weight of what I had set in motion. This wasn't just about Caleb and me anymore. This wasn't just about feeling appreciated or desired or alive. This was about 2 little people who hadn't asked for their world to fall apart because their parents couldn't find their way back to each other. The front door opened, and I heard Caleb's footsteps in the hallway. When he appeared in the kitchen, he looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He nodded politely to me, kissed both children, and thanked his mother for staying. "We need to talk," I said. "We will," he replied, "through our lawyers." "Caleb, please, don't do this to our children." "I'm not doing anything to our children, Tilly. I'm trying to protect them from a situation that has become untenable." The formal language, the careful distance, the way he spoke about our marriage like it was a failed business venture, it all felt like talking to a stranger wearing my husband's face. That night, I lay in our empty bedroom, listening to the sounds of my family living their lives without me. Caleb reading bedtime stories in his calm, warm voice. The children laughing at something he said. The quiet murmur of him and his mother discussing logistics I wasn't included in. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I wondered if maybe Caleb was right. Maybe this was untenable. Maybe we had broken something that couldn't be fixed, and the kindest thing we could do for everyone involved was to stop pretending otherwise. But as I drifted off to sleep alone in the bed I used to share with my husband, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was giving up on something I had never really fought for in the first place. The courthouse steps felt like a stage where the final act of my marriage would be performed for an audience of strangers and lawyers. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce papers arrived, 3 weeks of mediation sessions and legal negotiations, and careful conversations with children who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. He wasn't coming home. That much had been made clear through a series of increasingly formal communications from his attorney. Caleb had moved into a furnished apartment across town, taking his methodical approach to dissolution as seriously as he had once taken our wedding planning. I sat on the cold concrete steps, wearing the same black dress I had worn to my grandmother's funeral, waiting for my lawyer to arrive with news about the final settlement. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was mourning the death of my marriage in funeral attire, surrounded by the institutional architecture of legal endings. "Mrs. Gray," I looked up to find a young woman in a sharp suit approaching with a briefcase and the kind of confident stride that suggested expensive legal training. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, your attorney. I'm sorry I'm running late. Traffic was a nightmare." Jennifer Walsh looked like she was barely old enough to vote, let alone navigate the complexities of divorce law. But she had been recommended by Lydia's friend, who had gone through her own messy divorce the year before, and at this point, I was willing to trust anyone who promised to help me salvage something from the wreckage of my life. "How bad is it?" I asked as we walked into the courthouse. "It's not great," she said honestly. "Your husband's attorney is very thorough, and the evidence they've compiled is comprehensive. Comprehensive. That was one way to describe the folder of photos, text messages, and social media posts that painted a picture of a woman who had checked out of her marriage long before she physically left. Caleb's lawyer had organized everything chronologically, creating a timeline that made my behavior look calculated and deliberate rather than confused and impulsive. The good news is that he's not asking for alimony, and he's agreed to split the assets 50-50, Jennifer continued as we found seats in the hallway outside the courtroom. The custody arrangement is still being negotiated, but he's willing to consider shared custody if you agree to certain conditions. What kind of conditions? Supervised visitation for the first 6 months, mandatory counseling, and a morality clause that prohibits overnight guests when the children are in your care. The words hit me like a series of small explosions. Supervised visitation, as if I were a danger to my own children. A morality clause, as if I were some kind of serial adulteress who couldn't be trusted to maintain appropriate boundaries. Mandatory counseling, as if my desire to feel alive and appreciated was a psychological disorder that needed professional treatment. "This is insane," I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls. "I'm not a bad mother. I made some mistakes in my marriage, but that doesn't make me unfit to parent my children." "I understand your frustration," Jennifer said in the calm, professional tone that lawyers must practice in law school. "But from a legal perspective, your husband has built a strong case for his position. The photos of you with Mr. Moreno, the text messages, the social media posts, they all support a narrative of someone who prioritized personal gratification over family stability. It wasn't like that. I believe you, but what matters is what we can prove in court, and right now, the evidence supports his version of events more than yours." Before I could respond, I saw Caleb walking down the hallway with his attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he had been dissolving marriages since before I was born. Caleb was wearing his best navy suit, the one he had worn to our wedding, and he moved with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else in his life. When our eyes met across the hallway, I felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite identify. Regret, maybe, or recognition of the man I had fallen in love with 8 years ago. For just a moment, he looked like my husband instead of my legal adversary. Then his lawyer whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. Caleb nodded politely in my direction and continued walking toward the courtroom where our marriage would be officially terminated. "Mrs. Gray, are you ready?" Jennifer asked. I wasn't ready. I would never be ready to sit in a room and listen to lawyers discuss my children like assets to be divided and my marriage like a contract to be dissolved. But ready or not, this was happening. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of legal terminology and procedural formalities. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, custody arrangements, child support calculations, everything that had once been love and hope and shared dreams reduced to line items on a legal document. Caleb answered the judge's questions in the same calm, measured tone he used for everything else. Yes, he believed the marriage was irretrievably broken. Yes, he agreed to the proposed asset division. Yes, he felt the custody arrangement was in the best interests of the children. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself struggling to find words that could capture the complexity of what had gone wrong between us. How do you explain to a judge that you had felt invisible in your own life? How do you describe the slow death of intimacy and connection that had driven you to seek validation elsewhere? "Mrs. Gray, do you agree that this marriage cannot be saved?" the judge asked. I looked across the courtroom at Caleb, who was studying his hands with the same focused attention he brought to financial statements. 3 months ago, I would have said we could work it out, that we just needed better communication or counseling or a romantic weekend away. Now, sitting in this sterile room where our love story was being dissected by strangers, I finally understood what he had been trying to tell me with his spreadsheets and separate calendars and careful emotional distance. "Yes, Your Honor. I agree. The judge's gavel came down with a sound like a door closing. Just like that, 8 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared experiences were officially over. I was no longer Mrs. Caleb Gray. I was Ottilia Vega again, a single mother with supervised visitation rights and a morality clause hanging over my head like a legal sword of Damocles. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Caleb approached me for the first time in weeks. "Tilly," he said quietly, using my nickname for the first time since the anniversary dinner that had started this whole mess. "What? I want you to know that this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about protecting the kids and giving all of us a chance to build healthier lives." "Healthier lives," I repeated, tasting the words like something bitter. "Is that what this is?" "I hope so. I hope someday we can co-parent effectively and maybe even be friends again." Friends. After 8 years of marriage, 2 children, and a love story that had once felt like it would last forever, he was hoping we could be friends. "The kids miss you," I said, though I wasn't sure why. "I miss them too, but they'll adjust. Kids are resilient." "What about us? Are we resilient?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or the kind of regret that comes with recognizing a mistake too late to fix it. "I think we're both going to be fine, Tilly. Different, but fine." As he walked away, I found myself standing alone on the courthouse steps where this whole day had begun. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the concrete, and I realized I had no idea what came next. For 8 years, my identity had been built around being Caleb's wife and Emma and Lucas's mother. Now I was just Tilly, a 32-year-old woman with a failed marriage and a complicated relationship with the choices that had led me here. My phone buzzed with a text from Rafa. "How did it go? I'm here if you need anything." I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the way he had made me feel alive and desired and worth someone's complete attention. The way he had encouraged me to rediscover myself and pursue my own happiness. The way he had kissed me in his car while my husband was methodically building a case against me. "Thanks," I texted back, "but I think I need to figure this out on my own." "Are you sure? You don't have to go through this alone." But maybe I did. Maybe going through it alone was exactly what I needed to understand how I had gotten here and what I wanted to do next. Maybe the woman who had felt so invisible in her marriage needed some time in solitude to figure out who she really was when she wasn't performing for anyone else's approval. I deleted Rafa's number from my phone and walked to my car, feeling simultaneously empty and full of possibility. The divorce was final, the custody arrangement was settled, and my old life was officially over. For the first time in months, I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, and surprisingly, that felt like exactly where I needed to be. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different coffee shop, across from a court-appointed supervisor, watching Emma and Lucas color pictures at a small table near the window. The supervised visitation was humiliating, but it was also an opportunity to focus completely on my children without the distractions of household management or marital conflict. "They seem happy," the supervisor noted, making notes on her clipboard. They did seem happy. Different, but happy. They had adjusted to their new normal with the resilience Caleb had predicted, splitting their time between his apartment and my small rental house with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that children bring to even the most dramatic changes. My phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Emma's soccer game is Saturday at 10. You're welcome to come if you want." The invitation was carefully neutral, but it represented progress from the formal legal communications that had characterized our early post-divorce interactions. We were learning to be co-parents, slowly and carefully, rebuilding trust around our shared commitment to our children's well-being. I had started counseling, as required by the court, but I had continued it voluntarily as I began to understand the patterns and choices that had led to the destruction of my marriage. The therapist helped me see that my affair with Rafa had been a symptom, not a cause, a misguided attempt to address problems I hadn't been brave enough to confront directly. "Thank you," I texted back to Caleb. "I'll be there." As I watched my children laugh over their coloring books, I realized that this was what rebuilding looked like, not the dramatic gesture of a reconciliation or the clean slate of a new romance, but the slow, careful work of learning to be the person I wanted to be instead of the person I thought everyone else wanted me to be. The divorce had been final, the custody arrangement had been settled, and my old life had been officially over. But sitting in that coffee shop, watching my children adapt to their new reality with grace and resilience, I finally understood that endings could also be beginnings. I was no longer Mrs. Caleb Gray, but I was still Emma and Lucas's mother. I was still Lydia's sister and Helen's former daughter-in-law. I was still a woman capable of love and growth and second chances. And maybe, someday, that would be enough.